I'm going to talk to you about the idea of alignment, especially when you're doing your lesson analysis and you're answering any of the questions that have to do with like why or how. Number 7 is an example. How will these materials help you achieve your learning goals? You have to understand alignment to be able to answer this correctly. Number 8, describe your method, strategy, or approach to the lesson. Like when you present the information, what method are you using to present it? Are you going to do an interactive lecture? Are you doing a small group activity? Or what is your method? And then why did you make this choice? That means you're going to have to show alignment in your answer. The structure of your lesson. How are you using the materials and the methods and the activities to differentiate? Again, this has to do with alignment. So I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about a little trick you can use to help alignment be more evident for the person that's reading your lesson. Just imagine that this is the objective or the goal from a lesson plan. It's a science lesson plan, and the students will be able to predict weather-related phenomena and weather patterns. This is framework-based. It's pretty clear for students. What do I need to be able to do at the end of this lesson? I need to be able to predict, that's the measurable verb, predict a weather-related phenomena and a weather pattern. And I think I can assess that by giving students a scenario that shows maybe here's where this front is and here's the movement it's made so far. So what's the weather going to be over the next 3 days for this part of the nation? Something like that. The objective is fine. We're all good. We're writing our lesson analysis. And one of the questions that we need to answer is about methods. So keep in mind, this is the objective. Students will be able to predict weather-related phenomena and weather patterns. I put these important words in red here. I want you to imagine that on the lesson analysis, this is what someone wrote. The method is teacher instruction and cooperative learning. And when they answer the why portion, here's what the person wrote. I'm just going to tell you there's very little evidence of alignment in this answer. The person wrote, teacher instruction will allow students to review yesterday's concepts. Also, I'll introduce the content of the lesson that will be needed for the activity. Cooperative learning allows students to interact with each other and work together in problem solving. Lower level students will have assistance from their peers. Advanced students have more responsibility in helping others achieve the goal. Okay, so remember, the person is trying to justify their choice of using teacher-led instruction and cooperative learning. The problem with this answer is it's very generic. If this answer was great and acceptable for this lesson, and a week later I taught another lesson that used the same methods, I could take this answer, copy it, and paste it into the other lesson. And I wouldn't have to change a word of it, even if the objective was completely different. It could be a different subject. It could be a math lesson using teacher instruction and cooperative learning. This answer is so generic, I could copy it from the math lesson and stick it in a science lesson or any other lesson, and it would be fine. That's a huge red flag when you're doing these documents. You want your answers to be as specific to your lesson and your objectives as possible. And what you do is you just use a little word trick to help this seem to be more aligned. Now, the alignment needs to be there. Sometimes I've had students, their alignment in reality of what they're doing is wonderful. But when they answered the question on the lesson analysis, they wrote these very generic answers that show very little alignment. So how do you add alignment? The key is these words. Here's the improved version. Notice how often these keywords now show up. Teacher instruction will allow students to review yesterday's concepts, weather symbols, and their meanings. So now I know what the concepts were from yesterday. We studied weather symbols and their meaning. That's important for me to know. Also, I'll introduce them to how the weather changes on a weather map, which they need to know to predict the weather. So we'll talk about weather maps and how you use those to predict. Cooperative groups allow students to interact with each other and work together in successfully predicting the weather using maps. Lower level students will have assistance to predict. Advanced students will have more responsibility in helping others problem solve and predict the weather patterns. So I realize it's just words. This means so much more. As an assessor, not only do I better understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, but there's no doubt that you have aligned, even in your language, with your objectives. I can tell in your thinking in this answer that you are thinking about your objectives and you're making choices based on your objectives throughout. I can't tell in this answer. And why does it matter what I think? Because I'm your assessor, and I'm the one scoring you in that test domain 1. If I get a bunch of generic answers, then I can't really give you a proficient score because I can't see evidence that you understand why you're doing what you're doing. Here, I have a better idea that you understand why you're doing what you're doing because of your language you use. Much improved. Here's another one. Let's look at the materials. Same objective. Materials. I'm using weather maps presented on a projector, written group instructions, weather map handouts, poster boards. Well, why am I using these materials? Seeing the projected maps will help students who are visual. The group instructions will allow students to know what's expected in the activity. The handouts are simple to read and students will put them in order. Posters can visually present each group's problem solving to the class. All good reasons, but we could use a little bit of alignment. How? We keep ideas in our answer. Here's an improved version. Seeing the projected maps will help students understand how weather changes from day to day. Look at the difference. Seeing the projected maps will help students who are visual. That's all I said. Which is very generic versus seeing the projected maps will help students understand how weather changes from day to day. That's much more closely tied to the concepts. The group instructions allow students to know what is expected as individuals and as groups to predict the weather, which is what they're doing. The handouts are simple to read, and using the 5 maps to put in order will help them see how weather changes from day to day and how that helps predict the weather. So just to fill in, the map being given is 5 days of weather looking at the U.S. and then to put them in the right order, which will help them to see how fronts move across the U.S. They can see how air masses move and fronts. See, there's more. We didn't have this information in the other answer. It's much more closely tied to what's happening. The posters can visually present the problem solving and weather predictions to the class. Now I know what they're using posters for. They're going to show their weather predictions. So when you write your answers to these why and how questions, you've got to be very specific, and you've got to learn to use the language of your objectives in your answers. Is this a systematic assessment? Now, I realize we talked about formative assessments and summatives. Systematic is a new word for you. So a systematic assessment means that I have planned a system to help me know if students have met the learning goal or not. I've got something in place to plan. This one is not. I'll know students have met the learning goal through the presentations. Each group will present their findings to the class. Also, there will be a homework assignment to watch the weather and predict the weather for the next 3 days. So this is from one of the questions on the lesson analysis, and this is not very systematic. Here's a more systematic assessment. I'll give a formative assessment of the students by monitoring student progress throughout the class, through group presentations, and through asking questions. Each group will present their weather prediction to the class, including an explanation of their prediction. I will use the predictions to determine if they understand weather patterns and how to predict the weather. There will be an exit slip at the end of the activity. Students will write a paragraph to explain what they learned about predicting the weather. This is a much better assessment system plan because it is closely aligned and it is much more specific about what students will have to do and why they'll have to do it. So we're now looking at number 6 and 7, the resources and the alignment. I'm just going to check to see how long our video is getting to be. All right, we're doing fine. Number 6 and 7. So here's what it looks like on the analysis, what resources and how we'll use those. We've talked about this one a little bit, but here are some actual slides for you. Number 6, list your resources or materials. Number 7, explain how these are aligned with the specific objectives. Use the language of your objectives. Be explicit about your alignment. Be elaborate. Show your thinking. Whenever you're answering a why or how question, there are always 2 key words that you can think about. How are my choices aligned with my learning goals? And how are my choices appropriate for these students? Not students in general, but these students. For example, I might have a couple of resources I've specifically chosen because these kids are 9th graders. And I think these resources will really match their interest, and it'll align well with the content, and so they're very appropriate for these students. For example, I might find some videos of student drivers, of teenage drivers, that would be more appropriate for these students than just any old driver that I could find a video of. But if I've got, these are teen drivers, or these are errors that teen drivers often make, that would be a material that is more appropriate for these students because that's who they are. Number 8, let's talk about the method, strategy, and approach. So what does this even mean? I'm going to skip ahead. These are some common instructional methods that teachers use. Cooperative learning is small group learning. Direct instruction is a nice way of saying lecture. That means I'm giving the information out, maybe visually and orally. Teacher-directed instruction is more like I'm teaching and I'm giving instructions along the way about you're doing something and you're learning content at the same time, and I'm directing you and giving you instructions as we work through the content. Whole group learning, we're doing something all together. Maybe we're having a discussion. That could be a great whole group learning method. Discovery learning, I give you some materials and just have you start trying to discover how that they might work together. In other words, I pose a question or put a task before you, and you do it before we've really talked about the content, and you're trying to just discover what you can about what works and what doesn't along the way. This is often used in science, but it can be used in other areas as well. Independent work is kind of like seat work. Concept mapping is like a graphic organizer, except I don't make it and give it to you. We do it together. Like if I put you guys in a room and said, all right, I got a whiteboard and I put a big circle in the middle of the whiteboard and I wrote lesson planning. Tell me everything you think you know about lesson planning. And one of you raises a hand and says, well, you got to know what you're teaching. And I might like draw a little line out from my middle circle and draw, know your content and circle it. And we would just continue to map it out, graphic organizer style. But again, it's not me telling you, it's you telling me. And we're trying to figure out what we already know as a group. It's a great formative assessment, by the way. Super great if you have them do it individually. Still pretty great if you do it as a whole class to get a feel for what people know. Inquiry method is you come up with a question that you want to answer that's related to the content and you pursue the answer. Questioning is like Socratic method. Learning centers is like kind of the room is divided into different tasks and everybody rotates in small groups and does different things in small groups. Labs often use learning centers, but you can use them in a regular classroom also. We kind of did this the day that you guys were with me and I had the posters up and you walked around in small groups and you answered the question. That was kind of like centers. Recitation is like memorization. There's so many more. What do? You go to Google and you search for common teaching methods. Look, it even finishes itself. And you can find tons. So if you're confused about, well, what method should I use? Look around and find some that seem interesting. Or, since it's your first lesson, stay kind of simple for the first time out. But on number 8, what are you answering? You are telling the method that you're using, and then you're explaining why you made this choice. How do you answer the why? You think about those 2 A words. Your reasoning for doing that ought to be because you feel like that method closely aligns with your goals, or you feel like that method is particularly appropriate for not just students in general, but for these particular students because of some quality that they have. And that's how you do that one. Number 9. Okay, let's back up. Number 7 and number 8 ask you to align with your objectives. So let's look at those. So 7 is resources and how you resources that you'll use for the goals. 8 is your method, strategy, approach, and why you made this choice. So this is materials, this is method. Number 9 is more of a catch-all. It says, all right, so you've got some materials you're using. You've got a method that you're using. You've got some activities you've planned. How are you using all these things to differentiate instruction for students to achieve learning outcomes? Don't let this make your head spin. This is just all about appropriateness. You might think of it this way. Number 7 and number 8 are really about alignment. Align your resources with your goal. Align your method with your goal. Number 9 is align your materials and methods and activities with your kids. Why are you choosing these to use with these particular students? I'm going to say that again. So number 7 would be, here's the stuff you're using and here's how it aligns with the goal or the objective. Here's the method I'm using and my approach, and here's how that aligns with my goals or objectives. Number 9, switches. We're now doing how do your materials, methods, and activities differentiate for the students. So that's more like appropriateness. How is it appropriate for these students in number 9? Number 10, ask you about engagement. Now, you've already basically answered this question back on the lesson plan. It was the engagement box. So go back to the engagement box, look at what you wrote there, and then not just repeat that answer, but you can use that as your base and you can elaborate more about places where you think you're going to be engaging all students. And remember, engagement does not mean this is where they're going to have the most fun. Although there's nothing wrong with fun, but engagement means where are they using the content and where are they actively, individually, maybe or small group, are they involved in using, manipulating the content somehow, their engagement. And the very best engagement, there's evidence of engagement. The difference is, hey, everyone, think about this question. And I ask you a question and you sit there and you think about it. I have no idea if you're engaged or not. Even if I say, could someone tell me what you're thinking? And one kid of 30 says, well, I was thinking about this. That doesn't show me engagement about the other 9 people. All that shows me is that one kid thought about something. But if I say, all right, I've got a question and everyone's going to answer it. So take that piece of paper I gave you and pick up your pencil. Everybody, I want you to think about this question and answer it as an individual right now. And everybody starts writing. I walk around, I can look to see what everyone's answering. I can even read your answers over your shoulders. And if I take those pieces of paper up, I have evidence of your engagement. So look at places where you know you can with evidence show that you have students engaged with content. I'm going to stop this video here and maybe we'll have one more and we'll be done.